for coming to the Marin Science Seminar. This week, we start 5 amazing weeks of NOVA, Innovation, Science Now, Swagalicious, Door Prize stuff. So anyway, NOVA gave us a bunch of Door Prize stuff, and some of it is wrapped I wrapped it with little cute stickers and stuff. And so if you, right afterwards, if your name gets picked, then you get a little swaggy science prize. Okay, so 5 weeks in a row starting this Wednesday, 5 Wednesdays, 7:30 here. Most of you teachers are given extra credit. Might as well get as much as you can and learn awesome stuff, right? Okay, so if you don't have the schedule, you can get it back there. And this thing, it needs to be filled out. You can draw pictures here. I really don't care, but it needs to look like you did the stuff except for the essay, and then either Dr. Art or I will sign it at the end. You can go to Dr. Art right away if you're in a rush to get out of here. Otherwise, you go to me and after the raffle. Okay, so this evening, to kick us off, we are so happy. Thank you. Thank you so much, Julie Pettijohn, for making it so that we don't have dirty, filthy, disease-ridden water, so that we're not being poisoned by lead, that we're not dying of cholera, and other awesome things. So let's give it up for Dr. Julie Pettijohn.
Not a doctor.
Not a doctor, but a...
Maybe someday. Anyway, thank you for being So anyway, I do thank you for inviting me to be here tonight. And maybe everybody can just slightly tilt their chairs this way. I'm mostly going to be walking from here to here. There are some things that I have to show you that I need to step away from the desk in order to do so. So by way of introduction, I have an 8th grade student here tonight. He'll be here at Terra Linda next year. I also have a 5th grade Vallecito student. For the last 5 years, I've worked as a research scientist, certified industrial hygienist, and also certified lead risk inspector assessor for the California Department of Public Health. I received my bachelor's from UC Santa Barbara. Go Gauchos, if anybody knows that, and I'll tell you what a gaucho is later if you don't know. And I also have a master's degree in public health and environmental health sciences from UC Berkeley. So I should also say, go Bears. And I've worked as a public health professional for about 20 years. So I'll be telling you a little bit about some of the work that I do on a day-to-day basis. But I work for a bureaucracy, so I'm required to give you this long and very complicated disclaimer, which basically says, my presentation is entirely personal, and they're my own opinions, not those of Department of Public Health. So now that we have that out of the way, I can say that I gave you the disclaimer. Okay, question number 1. You see that there's a faucet here. So by show of hands, and don't be shy, please. By show of hands, how many of you today got a glass of water out of your tap at home or a drinking fountain anywhere you were, or if you cooked with water from your home? Raise them high. And it's okay if you ran your water through like one of those Brita filters, you should still raise your hand. Okay, so it's a pretty good amount. Okay, you know you're supposed to drink 8 glasses of water a day? All right. So, the point of this is that many parts of the world still do not have drinking water that is safe to drink. And yes, cholera, as you mentioned, is still a very real thing in many parts of the world. Cholera is one of those diseases that's caused by a bacteria in water. It actually can lead to death, and I think it was in 2010 there were between 100 and 300,000 people worldwide who came up with cholera. What happens to you when you get cholera is very unpleasant. Diarrhea, not so pleasant. Nausea, and the like. So, anyway. Okay, so let's go on to question number 2. So, a nutrition label. So, by show of hands, how many looked at a food nutrition label in the last week or so? You want to know what's in your food before you eat it. Okay? So packaging labels on food are ultimately designed to inform the consumer of exactly what they're eating. And this stems from the problem in our country of obesity, and particularly among childhood obesity. So you probably have noticed in the last several years at your school that you can't buy a sugared soda. And one of the reasons why is sugared sodas are very high, of course, in sugar and not particularly good for you. And actually, they have done studies to find that the more sugared soda you drink, the more you want to drink. And because of the obesity problems, it's just better not to have those available in the school setting. Okay, here's one. Who likes what that is? Does anybody know what that is? It's a shot. Okay. So who this year has thought to themselves, I should get a flu shot, or maybe your parent made you get a flu shot, or let's see, parent made you get one, you got one, you want to get one because you don't want to get sick. Okay, I'm going to raise my hand.
Does the one through your nose count?
The one through your nose count. It does. Yes, thank you for clarifying. You're right. There are two choices on the flu shot.
Yeah. That was
Just
fun.
some people don't like stuff up their
It
nose.
tastes like popcorn.
Yeah. Okay. So although the flu shot is not a required vaccine, many vaccinations are required for school-age kids. And I was talking, I think, to you earlier today that the most recent requirement for vaccinations is for whooping cough, or pertussis. And the reason why it is a requirement for 7th grade students is that we are seeing the highest levels of pertussis, whooping cough, since the 1950s. That's quite staggering, actually. And schools are the perfect breeding grounds for transmitting pertussis because it comes with close contact, and you're sick, but you don't even know you're sick, and you're actually infecting other people. The disease is actually particularly dangerous for infants and also for pregnant women, and it can result in fatalities, unfortunately. Most of the rest of you teenage kids, if you were to get whooping cough, you would just have one heck of a cough. It sounds like a barking seal. Okay, so this is my last question for right now. So how many of you have a part-time job outside your home, or if you're a parent, you have a job outside the home? Okay. So for those of you, okay, so that gives me a great thing. And then, so here's the question. Let me get to the chase. So how many of you think that if you have the part-time job or the full-time job outside of the home, answer for this, how many of you think that your workplace should be safe and healthful and free of recognized hazards? Okay, and so for those of you that don't have a job, how many people think that their parents should go to work and have a place of work that's free of recognized hazards, things that will make you sick? Okay, I'm going to raise my hand for that one. Okay. So in 1970, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, that's called the OSHA Act, you may have heard that acronym before, was passed that requires all employers to provide for their employees a workplace that's free of serious recognized hazards. There are many, many different regulations for workplaces with required employee training and information that must be provided to workers about hazards to which they're exposed to on the job. Okay, so that's the last question for now. So I think by the show of hands, I saw quite a few hands based on my 4 questions. You actually already know a lot about public health policies, but you may not associate those things, so vaccinations, obesity and food nutrition labeling, workplaces, safe drinking water. You may not associate those things with public health, but in essence, that is really what public health is. And here are just some of the programs. So this is our kind of crazy logo for the Department of Public Health, but here's just a smattering of some of the other different types of programs that we have in the Public Health Department. Everything from monitoring what's in marine organisms that you potentially could eat, to emergency preparedness, infectious diseases, that came up. And I'm sure you can think of plenty other examples besides what's here too. So you may go into a building and see a no smoking sign. Okay, people observe the no smoking sign. So the reason for that is because we know with very good evidence that secondary tobacco smoke can actually cause cancer. and also stroke. And so by observing, and we know that, when I was a kid, they had no smoking zones and smoking zones. Well, the smoke doesn't stay in the smoking zone. If you're ever, you kids are probably too young to remember, but there used to be airplanes where there was the smoking zone and the non-smoking zone. I can tell you the entire plane was a smoking zone, and we were all being exposed to secondhand tobacco smoke, putting us at risk for cancer and other diseases. So, and then the other thing too that's probably closer to home, so do you wear a seatbelt in the car? Do you wear a bike helmet, or do you wear a skateboard helmet? Those are things to observe and that count for public health. So the reason for wearing those things is injury prevention. So I'm going to define for you sort of the classic definition of what public health is. Okay. So I don't like to read slides, but basically it's the science of protecting and improving health of communities. That's really the key word right here. By education, promotion of healthy lifestyles, research, and injury prevention, which is what I just spoke about. And public health really helps to prevent health problems before they occur. So public health really looks at groups of individuals. So you all could be a group that I might be researching, or the Terra Linda population could be a group, or the high school could be the population, or our city could be a population that we're looking at. So if I'm looking at groups of people, that's very different than a physician that would treat and look at individuals. So the group is made up of individuals, but we're taking a step back from the physician and really taking a look at, well, what is impacting all of these people? Okay, so here's my last question. Okay, so I mentioned that I'm an industrial hygienist. This is supposed to be a toothbrush. It doesn't really look like a toothbrush. This is supposed to be a factory. So the hint is, I'm not a dental hygienist, and I don't clean factories. So what is an industrial hygienist? Does anybody have any ideas? Any idea? Yeah? Max?
Maybe it's someone that cleans the industrial facility.
Okay.
Observes how clean it is, or like observes like what's going on with the water or something.
Okay. Good. Anybody else? Anybody else? So you're pretty close. So this is the classic definition of an industrial hygienist. Basically, it's a workplace health and safety specialist. So I go into workplaces, I meet with employers, I look at what their employees are doing, the materials that they're working with, and I can tell you it varies from place to place to place. Think of all the places that you go to, or even the different occupations that your family members may have. They're all very different. So the industrial hygienist goes in and looks at how can we control hazardous agents that are in the workplace. And a hazardous agent could be just about anything that you can think of. Heat, we talked about radiation, noise, chemicals, hazardous waste, viruses, if you were working in a hospital, viruses, bacteria, anything that when you are working, it could make you ill. So the job of the industrial hygienist is to conduct sampling, to assess exposures to the hazardous agents that workers are exposed to, and to recommend controls to either eliminate those exposures or to reduce them. And sometimes that's not always possible, so you do have to do some other things too. And I'll kind of explain some of those things a little bit later on. So, and then there is an international certification process for industrial hygienists. And it involves taking one really gnarly test. But it's worth it. Okay.
How does, when you're looking at food preparation, how do you deal with the fact that you might have bacteria in the food versus the industrial safety of the workers? I mean, how does the FDA fit into what you're doing?
Yeah, well, the FDA is involved with that, but on a local level, it's really the counties that go in. So if it's a restaurant and they're preparing food, the county actually goes in and inspects. And what they look at a number of different things. They're looking at the food preparation techniques and making sure that the internal temperature of, if you're cooking meats, we all know you're supposed to cook your meat, that they're actually checking as the people are cooking the food in the restaurant to make sure that it's an appropriate temperature. It varies depending on the kind of meat. They're also checking things like the temperature of the refrigerators where you're storing the food items, because if they're not cold enough, just by storing something in a refrigerator, you can actually be growing bacteria. So, and they're also looking at general cleanliness and some other factors too. That's how I know most, on the most
But like if you're doing
closest level.
a food manufacturing plant, is that separate than your kind of plant?
So if it's a food manufacturing plant, it would likely also be the county that would be involved, but probably the state. The state usually likes to have its fingers in everything. I can tell you that because I work for the state. But yeah, and it would also be people like where they would likely, if it's a manufacturing facility, they'd likely have also an industrial hygienist or somebody who's a workplace safety and health expert on staff to be able to address things as they come up. Poultry processing is a prime example of that. They almost always have somebody on staff because of the problems of salmonella in your chicken. So cook your chicken. So the program that I work for as an industrial hygienist is called the Occupational Lead Poisoning Prevention Program, occupational being happening at your workplace. And I'll just give you kind of a quick snapshot of what we do. We're part of the occupational health branch. And in this program, the lead program, we do surveillance. Surveillance is kind of a funny word. It basically just means keeping track of adult lead levels in California. We do case investigation where we do see lead poisoning cases. And then we also provide a broad range of education and outreach. I can tell you that any blood lead test in California, if you were to go right now to your doctor, and for whatever reason they give you a blood lead test, doesn't matter how old you are, those results would actually be entered automatically by the laboratory. It's a requirement by law for those to go into one of our 2 state registries. There's a childhood registry and there's an adult registry. And the interesting thing is that the adult registry is for people 16 years or older. And why do you suppose, now 16-year-old, would you think that that would be an adult? Why do you suppose we take people that are 16 years?
Because they have a more developed body.
Well, more developed body. And then think about a 16-year-old. What's the really significant thing that you can do that you couldn't really do when you're 14 or 15?
Drive.
Well, drive. Get a job. So maybe this part-time job that you have, maybe for whatever reason you're exposed to lead at your job. So even though you're 16 doesn't mean that we consider you to be an adult, but if you are exposed at your place of employment, then we do consider you to be an adult. Let's see. And then what I mean by case investigation, so of the 58,000 tests that we get for adults 16 years and older, we get 58,000 of them every year, plus or minus. Of those, we're actually looking at all of the results as they come in. And we're trying to identify those that have really elevated levels, because those are the ones where we want to go talk to the worker, find out what, why do you have this high blood level? What are you doing? What is your job? And then with their permission, we also talk to the employer and find out what is it that you're doing, what materials are you using, and then we work with both the worker to get the medical care that they need, as well as the employer to make changes in the workplace so that they're not going to be further exposing workers down the road. Okay, so you might ask, well, what is this lead stuff? Okay, well, here's the chemical information about lead. I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that it is a heavy metal. It's quite heavy. It actually has a number of great properties, and for that reason, it's actually been used for centuries. Lead is not a new hazard, but it is still a problem. And most people, when they think of lead, they think of childhood lead poisoning, and they may or may not associate that with paint. Children in our country are routinely tested frequently by their pediatrician at age 1 to 2 years old. Those go into the child registry. And CDC, so that's the Centers for Disease Control, that hopefully will be open tomorrow because they're a federal agency. CDC estimates that 535,000 American children have enough lead in their blood, putting them at risk from cognitive, so mental deficiencies, as well as behavioral problems. So 535,000, that's about 10 times the population of San Rafael. That's a lot of kids, and this is a completely preventable disease from being lead exposed. So the other thing I should point out is for children and also for adults, there's no level of lead that's considered acceptable or okay or safe. And if you were to look across our nation for adults 16 years and older, if you weren't using lead, your average blood lead level would be about a little less than 2 micrograms per deciliter. And let me put that unit, most people are not familiar with the unit of microgram per deciliter. Let me put it into context for you. So a microgram is a millionth of a gram. Does everybody agree? Okay, so a gram, think of a paper clip. A paper clip or a dollar bill or a stick of gum all weigh about a gram. Now think about 1/1,000,000th of that weight. That's a pretty small amount. And then deciliter, which is the DL, is 1/10 of a liter. So that's about 3.3 ounces or a quarter of that can of soda. So a tiny, tiny, tiny amount in a relatively small volume of liquid, in this case blood. Lead is extremely toxic, is really what it amounts to. So there are workplace regulations for lead. There's actually 2 different ones. And it does allow workers to be working around lead, using lead materials, and have a blood lead up to 50 micrograms per deciliter before the employer really needs to make a lot of changes. And I can tell you that the health data is extremely compelling to indicate that you really need to keep your blood lead level below 10 so that you don't experience adverse health effects from lead exposure. So 10, if we're saying 10, but we're allowing people to be exposed up to 50, what does that mean for workers in California that are working with lead? Well, I'll tell you what it means. They are experiencing health effects. And it's really very unfortunate, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the efforts that we are making as part of the Department of Public Health to make changes to the lead regulations. And I did mention that, the lead has been used a long time. The Romans used lead pipes. They were very sophisticated in that they had indoor plumbing, but they used leaded pipes. Well, water, when it sits in a lead pipe, is going to be leaching lead out of the pipe into the water. Not such a great idea. What I found really interesting in looking into the history about lead is that even Benjamin Franklin, so everybody I think can agree, he was a pretty smart guy. So he wrote, and this is exactly what he called it, he wrote of lead's mischievous effects on workers. And particularly, he was very involved in the printing press industry. And in those days, they used lead to set the type. And if you don't do a good job washing your hands after it, you can get a pretty good lead exposure. I'll be talking a little bit about that. And then also plumbing. There again, thinking about the Romans with their leaded pipes. What I can tell you today is that if you were to put in piping in your home or a fixture, a faucet, they're all required by regulation now to be completely lead-free because of the issue of leaching. Okay, so how does lead get into your body? Do you have any idea? Anybody? How does anything get into your body?
Airway.
Okay, airway. Okay, you're inhaling it. Okay, Althea.
When I was little, they always had these commercials on the TV about kids eating paint chips.
Okay, eating, yes. And that is a true thing. It's actually called pica behavior. Pica meaning eating things that you're not really supposed to be eating. And I can tell you my brother was a pica child.
People also use to burn batteries.
Burn batteries, yeah. So when you're burning the battery, the lead that's in the batteries, like a car battery, has a ton of lead in it, and it's just the way that they're constructed. If you burn the battery, it produces a fume. And the point is, so you all were right. So the point is inhalation of lead, fume, and dust. Fume being when you're heating something with lead, you're producing the smallest particle, which is called a fume. And it's even smaller than a dust. It's micron size, very, very tiny. And there's nearly complete absorption into your bloodstream when you are exposed to fumes. And I can tell you, so this guy, he's welding. He's welding on something that's lead, right? Do you see the cloud of smoke or fume? And do you notice he's not wearing any respiratory protection? He has a glove on and he has safety glasses for welding. No respiratory protection. I can tell you he's getting a whopping exposure from the lead that he's burning. It's going into a fume, very small particle size, going into his bloodstream and almost immediately increasing his blood lead level. So ingestion, you're right, paint chips. Even if you're working with lead, so I mentioned if you are working with lead and you don't wash your hands and then you go eat, drink, or smoke, well, we call that a lead sandwich because you can't see lead, but it's all over your hands. And if you're bringing it to your mouth, you can get a pretty large exposure just from that. And so we mentioned heating, but anything that you do to a leaded item, if you scrape it, if you sand it, if you grind it, if you anything you can think of, you're going to be making particles and fumes.
So a lot of hobbyists use lead solder.
Good question. Yes, that is absolutely true. Yeah, in fact, I have a slide down the road that I'm going to talk about lead solder. Solder is an interesting question, and then we can also talk a little bit separately from that. But let me just go over the next one real quick. So what are some of the health effects? So we're now seeing that not only short-term, very high exposures to lead, like the gentleman that was in the picture before, he's going to have a really high exposure, that not only can that cause poisonings, but also long-term, or what we call chronic exposures, lower-level exposures, can also cause health effects. And the problem is, you can damage your body without seeing obvious health effects. You can be lead poisoned and not know it. In fact, it's very common. You walk into the doctor, oh, I don't feel so well, I'm not sleeping so well, my stomach kind of hurts, I'm having difficulty concentrating. All prime symptoms of lead poisoning. And the other problem is that even with low-level chronic exposures, you can permanently damage your body. And some of the body parts here, high blood pressure, problems with your kidney, your brain, adverse reproductive effects, so that's both for men and for women. It can cause problems conceiving. Oh,
Yeah.
see, that's the lovely state system for you. Anyway, so it can cause tremendous effects also for that. So just as a reminder that we are shooting for keeping people below 10 micrograms per deciliter. So Althea asked about leaded solder. So what do you think might be some of the occupations where people are exposed to lead? Any ideas? So we talked about batteries, we talked about solder, we talked about paint. Okay, go ahead.
Building like big cargo ships and stuff.
Cargo ships, okay. Maybe doing some welding or construction. Yeah.
Fishers.
I'm sorry?
Fishers.
Fishers?
They use the lead weights.
Oh, fishing. Yeah, lead weights. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. These are all true statements. Okay, so here's just some examples. The car repair is really focused on battery repair. In the days where we used to repair batteries instead of just pulling them out and putting a new one in. Also radiator repair. There again, it's kind of a dying breed. Also construction and remodeling work and demolition, that's probably where you're going to come into contact with the lead paint. Electronics, that's where you find your solder use. And the other thing too is that it's not only occupational exposures, it's also if you are a vintage car repair enthusiast, those old classic Mustangs, I love the 1968 Mustang. That was the year I was born. Paint on that vehicle is going to have excessively high levels of lead. And if you are altering that paint, maybe sanding the paint to repaint it, you're going to be getting a pretty good exposure. Stained glass work, same thing too. You're using lead solder, but also lead cane, which is the pieces that look like metal. Yes?
What about things like heavy metals in cosmetics or sunblock and things like that?
Yes.
A lot of
There is lead in various cosmetics, and they've done a bunch of testing recently on lipsticks. And particularly the ones that are really red tend to have higher concentrations of lead, unfortunately. And yeah, you put that leaded lipstick on, you're eating lead. So they're actually doing a better job these days, actually testing more cosmetic products. And that's one of the parts of the occupational health branch is we do have a safe cosmetics program where they're starting to go out and actually pull things off the shelf and do testing for a variety of different things. Lead, titanium dioxide, a number of different things. So I hope that answers your question.
The other two places are like glazes on pottery.
Yeah, exactly.
And then coils on like tea kettle heaters. The Canadians poisoned everyone with their favorite tea kettle.
I haven't heard of the tea kettle one. I gotta look into that. But you're absolutely right about the ceramics. And in fact, a lot of times, even if you go into Macy's today, I know most of you probably are not shopping in the pottery section, but you'll frequently see a little notice that says, "Warning, this could cause cancer or reproductive harm." And that's because even though they've done a really good job removing lead from many glazes on potteries, it still exists. If you were to buy pottery in Mexico, I would definitely test it before you put something acidic into it.
That same warnings also on like a lot of earrings and jewelry.
Correct. You're absolutely correct. And in fact, there have been kids that have like small children have inadvertently swallowed jewelry that they didn't know was lead containing, and they got extremely ill. So you're absolutely right about that. So lead, I'm arguing, is just about everywhere. You just have to look for it. So here's where we get what I think is some of the fun stuff. So how can you tell how much lead a worker is exposed to? Well, the first thing is an air monitoring device, and I will show you this to you. So this is actually a pump that is not currently working, so otherwise I turn it on, you could hear it. It just sounds like a pump. But it operates under a vacuum, and then in this little contraption is a filter. So what happens is that, and there's a hole here. So air is being pulled through this pump. It operates like a vacuum. It's sucking air in, and it's trapping the lead on this filter. So I could put this on a worker, like myself. Well, let's see. Put it on. Okay, and then I would clip this part. Oh, probably most people don't like it immediately around their arm, but just for the sake of argument, I'm just going to attach it in the front. Okay, and I want to get this as close to my breathing zone as possible, right? So because I want to know how much lead is a person being exposed to in air. And if I know how fast I've run this pump, so the flow rate, and if I know how long I've run it, I can give that information to the lab, and then based on how much lead is on this filter, they're able to calculate for me how much lead was in the air that the worker was being exposed to. And there are regulations about how much lead in air somebody can be exposed to. So this is an air monitoring device, personal air monitoring device. Yeah, question.
What would you do if, like, you did do that and there was too much lead in the air? Would you, like, shut down the pump?
Oh, great question. If there is too much lead in the air, it really depends on the level. But I have seen it excessively high. And generally speaking, you're going to take these filters to a lab and they're going to turn them around in 24 hours. And you're going to make a quick phone call the next day. Hey, you got a big problem. Stop what you're doing. I'm coming over and I'm going to help you. A lot of times it's the ventilation system, so like an engineering system that's in the worker's area that's supposed to suck the lead air away from their breathing zone. A lot of times it's just not functioning correctly. But there could be other issues too. So let's see. Another thing that I brought to show you, so testing of surfaces or materials or pottery or solder or the chair or anything, paint for that matter. So these are lead check swabs. You can even buy them at Home Depot. I don't know if somebody has something that they want to test, but it kind of looks like a cigarette, but there are two little things that you squish on here. One is called A and one is called B. And I got to shake it for about 15 seconds. Does anybody have anything that they want to test?
Test your jewelry or...
Jewelry, or otherwise I was just going to test the chair.
Chair.
Oh, okay. So that's what I wanted to do. So some of the liquid just squeezed out, so I don't know if you can see it. It's kind of brownish.
How do you do with phone?
It could slightly discolor your phone, just so you know. I mean, I'm happy to do the tabletop. Yeah.
You do my headphones?
Are they, let me take a look at them.
I don't really mind getting them. We got them for $10.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to do this for 30 seconds. $15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25,
It's either really clean or really bad.
28, 29, 30. Okay, so we'll need something just to wipe off the stuff. Okay, so if there were to be lead, so you're in luck. If there were to be lead, this would either be pink or red. And the darker the pink or the red color, the more lead that's there. But it can't tell me exactly how much is present, just that lead is there. And then so what you would do to make sure that this test was actually, that I did it correctly, I actually have something that has lead. And it's right here. So, and pretend that I have gloves on, okay? Okay, so on this card is actually lead. So you see that it's pink or red. So what it's saying is that this can detect that lead is present. So lead was not on her earphones, but it is a valid test because look at how bright red that is. So it can't tell you exactly how much, just that it's there above whatever the reporting limit of this is, which is 2 micrograms. So tiny, tiny, tiny amount. Remember a gram was, paperclip. So I'm going to put this back in here because it has other lead on it. And the thing that's kind of interesting about these, which I sort of learned the hard way, I use these a lot for detecting the presence of lead and sort of showing the employer, look, you have lead on your cafeteria table. Not such a great idea. You really have to take a picture of these because the color fades over time, unfortunately. So there's that. And then just the last thing that I brought to show you is something that's called, how are we doing on time?
You're good.
I need to speed up. So this is the other thing that I brought for you. So if you wanted to check lead on a surface, this is a transect. So I know the exact size of this. This is the smallest size that I can use. If I was in a lead factory and I wanted to know how much lead is on that table, I wanted to quantitatively know how much lead is on that table or on the floor or wherever you want to test or in your home, anywhere. You would tape this to the desk, take out one of these, they're called ghost wipes. And the reason why they're called, and here again, I have gloves on, do you see them? So they're very, very thin, okay? And with this transect, I would rub back and forth, up and down, back and forth, and then I would do all 4 corners. Okay, and then this wipe, which may or may not have lead in it, gets shoved into a hard container, and I take this to the lab and I tell them the size that I sampled was 10 by 10 centimeters. And there are standards for how much is acceptable lead surface contamination. I tend to like to use the ones that are 12 by 12 because the math's a little easier, but it was kind of too hard to bring a large transect with me. Okay, so we talked a lot about workplaces and where lead is and how to test for lead. So if I'm out doing all of this work, I have to remember to protect myself. So not only the workers have to wear this kind of gear, I have to wear it myself. So this is called the Tyvek suit. Kind of looks like maybe a spaceman suit. Makes a great Halloween costume. And the thing that's great about it is you can put this over your clothes and it prevents lead from getting on your clothes. And then you would leave this at your workplace. It doesn't come home with you because you also don't want to contaminate your car, right? If you wore this in your car, it's full of lead, it's going all over your car. And then it's going all over your home and everywhere else. So people would put these on, and this one actually has built-in booties because you don't want to get your shoes contaminated. And it also has a hood. So I was going to put it on, but I think we're kind of running short of time. If anybody wants to try it on after.
Can I try it on? Right now?
Here, after. And then some of the other things that we would have for lead workplaces, these are called respirators. This is the minimum level of protection that you would want to wear. These two are actually equivalent. They look a little different manufacturers, but the filter is specific for reducing the amount of lead that you're breathing. So,
Do they also work for meth fumes?
no, different filter.
Oh.
Good phone.
Good.
Part of my Halloween costume, right? So these are equivalent, and if you were a worker or if you were me going into a lead site, required protection.
Are those girly ones? Is there like different colors?
Oh, no, the color, so that's actually funny, that's a good comment. People call these purple pancakes. When I talk to employers and I say, what kind of respirator are your people wearing? He goes, well, or she goes, I don't really know, but they look like pink pancakes or purple pancakes. Then I go, oh, well, at least I know they have the filter right. Because the filter or the cartridge that you have on your respirator is completely related to whatever you're being exposed to in your job. So if it's a meth lab, this is not going to help you at all. You're going to want something that can protect you against volatiles. Or if you were, I don't know, if you're going into an ammonia facility, this would do you absolutely no good because that's not what it's designed to do. And then of course other fun stuff that I wear in my job, and lead workers do too, part of that. Okay. Traffic safety vest, right? Right, high visibility, you don't want to be hit.
What does the traffic safety vest do, like, protect from lead?
It doesn't do anything to protect you from lead, but oftentimes you're working in a facility where vehicles are going by you faster than you can believe, and you just don't want to be hit. Also safety glasses. What else did I bring to show you? Okay, these are the gloves. So these are nitrile type gloves. Of course, first you want to make sure that it holds air. And then you want them to fit pretty tight because you still want dexterity. So if I'm going into a lead job, I'm always going to have gloves on. Okay, and then when you remove it, you don't want to touch, you just want to pick and turn it inside out. So now the lead, if it's on here, is on the inside. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is my ha-ha. This is actually me at a lead job. So a great Halloween costume or protection for lead. It's kind of hard to tell it's me because you're so fully suited with equipment. So just in closing, just have a couple more slides. But so I mentioned that we recommend 10 micrograms per deciliter to protect workers from the adverse health effects of lead, and that the current regulations allow much higher levels, up to 50. So this is a recent article. I love the subtitle, Rules Meant to Protect Workers Against On-the-Job Exposure Are Scandalously Outdated. Love that title. And it's absolutely true. The lead regulations were passed in 1978 based on 1978 data. That's a long time ago. We know a lot more about lead than we've ever known before. And so my agency is actually has sent recommendations to CalOSHA, so that's the California Occupational Safety and Health Administration, to suggest changes to the lead standard to make them more health protective, so that people are not legally being exposed to lead at concentrations that will cause them severe adverse health effects. So just in closing, I cannot do a talk without talking about global climate change. So we've talked about the various public health policies, vaccinations, and lead protection, and immunization. So something else that is definitely very real is global climate change. So we do know that, or it is projected that the Earth's temperature will rise significantly over the next 100 years. It's already risen 1.4 degrees. And if you know anything about global climate change, you know that that causes, melting of the polar ice caps and glaciers and sea level rise, and it affects our ecosystem. And the reason why this is occurring is the buildup of greenhouse gases around our planet, from burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, industrial processes. We're causing the problem, by the way. And it's true. It's absolutely true. The evidence is very clear. They've really framed global climate change. Some people also call it global warming, which I would argue is not the correct term to use. Global climate change means changes in temperature extremes, so both extremely wet or extremely dry, whereas global warming really means more dry and hot. So it has been framed as an environmental problem, but I can tell you that it is a human problem, and one that we have to really start thinking even more deeply about. So it's more than just impacts to the cute polar bears. So I can tell you that some of the public, if I'm looking at through a public health lens, some of the problems that we are anticipating. So we're going to have extreme heat events. There will be seniors and young kids and other people that are really overcome by the heat and have problems, significant problems. Extreme precipitation. There again, we can have injuries, illness, and death. Waterborne diseases. If we have excessive water is going everywhere. Maybe we're introducing waterborne diseases, so like cholera, for example. It's very real that cholera could increase if there were to be excess water due to global climate change. People with respiratory problems will have even more problems, and people that aren't so inclined to respiratory issues may develop them, so asthmatics. And then, as I mentioned, some people are more susceptible. So now that I've been the total Debbie Downer, people are saying, oh, don't talk to me about global climate change, it just so bums me out. And it bums me out too, but there are things that we can do called mitigations and adaptation strategies. And the good news is that applying both mitigations and adaptation strategies, while they're necessary, they can have co-benefits that help public health. And what I mean by a co-benefit is that it's good for the protecting against global climate change, and it's also good for your body. So I will give you an example. So if we were to get out of our car, walk, ride, bike, skateboard, what have you, what do you suppose might be some of the benefits to both the environment and to your body? Anybody? Wake up. I'm almost done. Okay. What would be good for you? So
You get to exercise.
you're going to exercise. That's a benefit.
Yeah.
Okay? So reduced air and water pollution, increased physical activity. I talked to you about obesity and those sugary sodas. Reduced motor vehicle related injuries. And this is the one that's kind of squishy but absolutely true. So improved social connections. And what that means is that if you are riding your bike to the shopping mall, you may see some people along the way, and you may stop and talk to them. That's a social connection. That's a positive thing. Are you going to talk to somebody while you're in your car? Well, maybe you will on your hands-free device, but it's different when it's a face-to-face. So what can you do? You all are teens, well, most of you are teens. So what can you do to help with global climate change? These are some of the really quick, easy ones. Anyone have an idea what the 5 R's are?
Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Yeah, so anyone, so reduce, reuse, recycle, rot, anybody else? Good answers. So reduce, reuse, recover, recycle, and rot. Those are the 5 R's. Saving energy. So I'm, taking shorter showers, turning off your lights, lots of things that you can do. Buying things with less packaging. Stop using those plastic water bottles that take a ton of energy to make, and then a lot of effort to recycle also. Get involved with advocacy organizations. There's actually one that is called Inconvenient Youth, and it's based on Al Gore, who was our vice president. It's based on a book that he wrote called The Inconvenient Truth, and he was really one of the first public people to come out and say, wow, this is really a problem, global climate change. So Inconvenient Youth is actually a group started by a 17-year-old, and it's a blog site where teens all over share ideas. And just the concept that, these are simple things, but imagine if people all around the world did them. It'd make a big difference. But realistically, policies will have to change, and we're going to have to start thinking more across nations instead of state by state or country by country. This is a global issue. Everyone needs to get involved. And I can tell you that a lot of work is being done at the state level. This is also a great website if any of you have science teachers and such, great ideas about how to look at global climate change. And there's actually even money that's available, scholarships and grants for doing work on global climate change as a school. And then my other real purpose for being here is that I'm thinking probably most of you in this room like science, or maybe even a little bit like science. I'm really encouraging you, go into the sciences, go into engineering. It's never been a greater time or a greater need. So you're the next generation. Share what you know. Get impassioned. Make a difference. So, and sort of in line with that, get involved, become a scientist, become an engineer. I mean, just in my agency alone, number of different career opportunities, and it's everything from engineers to nutritionists. I can tell you that we do have a number of internships for college kids, and they're actually paid. Boy, I would have loved to have a paid scholarship when I was a college kid. So that is all that I have. Sorry that I went a little long. I'm happy to entertain any questions that you have, or if you want to come up and play with my gear.
Oh, that too. I was just wondering, if you work for like a factory or something, and for some reason there's a high level of lead exposure, and you were to get sick, and very, very bad sick, or die, would they pay for the medical issues, or would you be left alone for that?
Your employer is required to pay for your medical care while you're in so it's called medical surveillance. You would go in every so often and have a blood test, but eventually you would probably be referred to something that's called workers' compensation, and then they would pay for your bills. They would evaluate, are you truly impacted by this lead, what's going on with you, and then a claim would be filed. It's a little complicated, but yes, they would pay for your medical care, and employers are required to have workers' compensation insurance. Other questions? Yeah?
What is does lead level have anything to do with the pH level of water? And
good question.
how does it go with osmosis and like transfer of water and different temperatures and
Great question. More acidic, so lower pH, higher leaching of lead. And I can tell you that that's absolutely the truth. I had a case where these people, unfortunately, they were making homemade pineapple juice. So pineapple juice is very acidic. They were storing it in a glazed ceramic pitcher that they put in their freezer. They would take it out, let it thaw, use some of it. They'd throw it back in the freezer. They'd take it out, let it thaw, and they would do this on and on. So the lead, because the solution was so acidic, that pineapple juice, it was leaching lead out in astronomical amounts. The whole family ended up being lead poisoned. In terms of the osmosis issue, where we have water treatment facilities, they do have some filters for lead, and I do believe that they are based on osmotic principles. And then they have other filters too. So there are requirements about how much lead can be in your drinking water, and it's very small, 15 parts per billion. So a thousandth of a part per million. So very, very, very small amount. And in fact, they're thinking about lowering that because it's a little high. Yeah.
How do you treat someone with lead poisoning?
Oh, good question. Okay. Well, if you're really very ill, you can actually chelate somebody, and that is that you give, under the care of a physician, you give them drugs that bind lead that's in your bloodstream, and that helps reduce your blood lead level. But it can be very dangerous because it also strips your body of calcium. So it's kind of like you do it if the person really is having a lot of health effects and is really very ill. Otherwise, the best way to treat somebody, remove them from lead exposure. Move them, have them do a different job or not work at all for a while. Keep testing their lead in their blood, and over time it will come down. Great question. Yeah.
So it sounds like once you're exposed, there's going to be a long period of time before you're cleansed of it.
Yes.
So it sounds like a really bad long-term thing to be exposed to lead.
It's a bad thing. Like if you were instantaneously exposed right now and you've never been exposed, it's going to take your body 2 months to get to the half-life of what you were originally exposed to. But if you were somebody that worked 20 years around lead, it actually builds up in your bones. It's very similar to calcium. So although, and what happens is because of the process of diffusion, as your blood lead level starts going down and you're no longer exposed, it starts leaching from your bones into your blood. So, and sometimes people have high blood lead levels for years after they've been exposed, and it's really very sad. Or if they have a retained bullet that for whatever reason is inoperable and they have to leave it there, lead is in ammunition. Many of these people have lead poisoning, and there's really nothing you can do about it other than to say, please don't expose yourself to any other sources of lead. Great question. So any other questions? Anyway.
Well, Ms. Pettijohn, thank you so much for stopping by and telling us all about the wonders of public health. And people, if you want to know more about it, there's some flyers that Ms. Pettijohn brought. New health dangers from lead.
Yeah, that one's in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish, sorry.
Bilingual, and they're back there.
Yes.
And let's give a warm thank you. You get a goodie bag.
Oh, thank you. I also have some buttons if people are interested, since you've sat through my lead talk. A lead expert.
For you.
Oh, thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, if you need that, you can turn that off now. Gentlemen, thank you for coming to the Marin Science Seminar. This week, we start 5 amazing weeks of NOVA, Innovation, Science Now, Swagalicious, Door Prize stuff. So anyway, NOVA gave us a bunch of Door Prize stuff, and some of it is wrapped I wrapped it with little cute stickers and stuff. And so if you, right afterwards, if your name gets picked, then you get a little swaggy science prize. Okay, so 5 weeks in a row starting this Wednesday, 5 Wednesdays, 7:30 here. Most of you teachers are given extra credit. Might as well get as much as you can and learn awesome stuff, right? Okay, so if you don't have the schedule, you can get it back there. And this thing, it needs to be filled out. You can draw pictures here. I really don't care, but it needs to look like you did the stuff except for the essay, and then either Dr. Art or I will sign it at the end. You can go to Dr. Art right away if you're in a rush to get out of here. Otherwise, you go to me and after the raffle. Okay, so this evening, to kick us off, we are so happy. Thank you. Thank you so much, Julie Pettijohn, for making it so that we don't have dirty, filthy, disease-ridden water, so that we're not being poisoned by lead.
then we're not dying of cholera and other awesome things. So let's give it up for Dr. Julie Pettijohn.
Not a doctor.
Not a doctor, but a,
Maybe someday. Anyway, thank you for being So anyway, I do thank you for inviting me to be here tonight. And maybe everybody can just slightly tilt their chairs this way. I'm mostly going to be walking from here to here. There are some things that I have to show you that I need to step away from the desk in order to do so. So by way of introduction, I have an 8th grade student here tonight. He'll be here at Terra Linda next year. I also have a 5th grade Vallecito student. For the last 5 years, I've worked as a research scientist, certified industrial hygienist, and also certified lead risk inspector assessor for the California Department of Public Health. I received my bachelor's from UC Santa Barbara. Go Gauchos, if anybody knows that, and I'll tell you what a gaucho is later if you don't know. And I also have a master's degree in public health and environmental health sciences from UC Berkeley. So I should also say, go Bears. Parts of the world still do not have drinking water that is safe to drink. And yes, cholera, as you mentioned, is still a very real thing in many parts of the world. Cholera is one of those diseases that's caused by a bacteria in water. It actually can lead to death, and I think it was in 2010 there were between 100 and 300,000 people worldwide who came up with cholera. What happens to you when you get cholera is very unpleasant. Diarrhea, not so pleasant. Nausea, and the like. So, anyway. Okay, so let's go on to question number 2. So, a nutrition label. So, by show of hands, how many looked at a food nutrition label in the last week or so? You want to know what's in your food before you eat it. Okay? So packaging labels on food are ultimately designed to inform the consumer of exactly what they're eating. And this stems from the problem in our country of obesity, and particularly among childhood obesity. So you probably have noticed in the last several years at your school that you can't buy a sugared soda. And and I've worked as a public health professional for about 20 years. So I'll be telling you a little bit about some of the work that I do on a day-to-day basis. But I work for a bureaucracy, so I'm required to give you this long and very complicated disclaimer, which basically says, my presentation is entirely personal, and they're my own opinions, not those of Department of Public Health. So now that we have that out of the way, I can say that I gave you the disclaimer. Okay, question number 1. You see that there's a faucet here. So by show of hands, and don't be shy, please. By show of hands, how many of you today got a glass of water out of your tap at home or a drinking fountain anywhere you were, or if you cooked with water from your home? Raise them high. And it's okay if you ran your water through like one of those Brita filters, you should still read the count. Okay, so it's a pretty good amount. Okay, you know you're supposed to drink 8 glasses of water a day? All right. So, the point of this is that many reasons why is sugared sodas are very high, of course, in sugar, and not particularly good for you, and actually they have done studies to find that the more sugared soda you drink, the more you want to drink, and because of the obesity problems, it's just better not to have those available in the school setting. Okay, here's one. Who likes what that is? Does anybody know what that is? It's a shot. Okay.
Oh, I love those.
So who this year has thought to themselves, I should get a flu shot, or maybe your parent made you get a flu shot, or let's see, parent made you get one, you got one, you want to get one because you don't want to get sick. Okay, I'm going to raise my hand.
Does the one through your nose count?
The one through your nose count. It does. Yes, thank you for clarifying. You're right. There are 2 choices on the flu shot.
Yeah, that was
Just
fun.
some people don't like stuff up their
It
nose.
tastes like popcorn.
Yeah. Okay. So although the flu shot is not a required vaccine, many vaccines vaccinations are required for school-age kids, and I was talking, I think, to you earlier today that the most recent requirement for vaccinations is